Hello and welcome. One of America's most high-profile race trials has ended with the conviction of the white former police officer Derek Chauvin. The verdict in the George Floyd case is seen as a landmark test of police accountability. President Biden said it could be a giant step forward for justice in America. Chauvin was found guilty on 3 charges: second-degree murder, third-degree murder and manslaughter. His bail was immediately revoked and he was placed in custody. Sentencing is likely to happen in 2 months. Chauvin could spend decades in jail. He is expected to appeal against the verdict. His lawyers say he acted, though, like any reasonable police officer. With this report, here's our North America correspondent, Lebo Diseko.
There you go. A community awaits a verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty.
Derek Chauvin convicted of 2 counts of murder and 1 of manslaughter. The former policeman led from court in handcuffs. It was a result many hadn't dared to believe was possible.
In these types of cases, justice has not gone in the way of victims when victims are African Americans at the hands of the police. So to hear that he was guilty on all 3 of the charges, it just seemed like a dream.
It's a beautiful day. It's a sad day because George Floyd isn't here anymore with us, but it's a beautiful day because justice was served.
Mr. Floyd's family called it a victory for anyone who's ever been pinned down.
Because he showed me how to be strong. He showed me how to be respectful. He showed me how to speak my mind. I'm gonna miss him, but now I know he's in history. Yay. What a day to be a Floyd, man.
Wow. It's okay.
For 2 of the trial's earliest witnesses, the emotion of this moment was overwhelming. President Biden paid tribute to them and all of those whose testimony led to this. But he said outcomes like this one are still too rare.
It was a murder in the full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Those are George Floyd's last words. We can't let those words die with him.
This crime might never have come to trial had it not been for this community who documented it. Trauma collectively relived through the trial. But for now, some relief as people take in the victory. Many here believe that this is not a case of problem solved, rather an opening for real change when it comes to how black people are treated by police in America. Lebo Diseko, BBC News, Minneapolis.
Another of our correspondents, Larry Madowo, has been in Minneapolis throughout the trial, and a few hours ago he gave us the reaction from George Floyd Square.
I'm standing just steps away from where Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. We can now say that because that's essentially what the court and this jury agreed when they found him guilty of the 3 charges, 2 of murder and 1 of manslaughter. When that announcement came out, there was a spontaneous celebration here. Somebody in the crowd yelled guilty, and then people began to clap. We've also had music, we've had speeches, and we've had reactions from the community. People have brought posters. One says, "Police, you're not absolved." Another said, "The work continues. There is a lot more work to do." And that's what we've been hearing from the community here, who say, while this verdict is important and it is historic that Derek Chauvin becomes the first white man ever convicted for killing a black man, first white police officer, there's a whole lot more that needs to be done. But right now, everybody taking in this moment of music, of celebration. George Floyd Square has become a place they call of community, of public grief, and of protest.
Larry Madowo there in George Floyd Square. Well, let's take you live now to Minneapolis. I'm joined by Skylar Henry, who has also covered this trial for CBS News throughout. Skylar, I've heard so much reaction since those verdicts were announced. And the big feeling I've heard is one of relief from many people and for many different reasons. Is that something you've been feeling and seen there too?
Yeah, Lucy, you know, many of the folks that we spoke with felt just an overwhelming sense of emotional weight, so to speak, in the city, wondering and waiting with bated breath to see what would happen when the verdict was read out. Many people happy to see what happened in terms of Derek Chauvin being found guilty of all 3 charges filed against him, but also recognizing that this is still very much a big issue here, not only in Minneapolis, but across the country in terms of law enforcement and communities they serve, and just trying to build better relationships around that. We saw people who were extremely excited, saying that justice was served and that law enforcement was finally being held accountable, but also recognizing the fact that George Floyd lost his life last May, and realizing what we as a country have endured over the last 10 or so months, and what this city has had to endure over the last year or so as well, when you take into consideration the large protests that have been here. I mean, if you look what this city has been like over the last week or so, when there's the incident involving Daunte Wright over in Brooklyn Center, which is about 15-20 minutes outside of Minneapolis, where he was shot and killed by a police officer. This is still very much a community hurting. The funeral for Daunte Wright is set for tomorrow, so there's still going to be plenty of people around calling for justice in that case, and also calling for better police reform nationwide.
And Skylar, it's not quite over yet, is it? I mean, what happens next in terms of this case?
Right. So the judge will sentence Derek Chauvin within the next 8 weeks. When the prosecution was asked about what type of sentence they feel as though Chauvin should serve, they simply responded with a just one. Now, that could mean that he could serve anywhere from about 12 years in prison, if not longer. The maximum sentence for the charges he is was convicted of is about 40 years. And then there are the other 3 officers who were involved in that incident last Memorial Day. They are expected to be in trial at the end of August. They are charged with aiding and abetting murder in the case of George Floyd. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how this all plays out, given the fact that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 charges filed against him, and what that means for those 3 officers moving forward.
And Skylar, just 20 minutes before that verdict, we had news of another police shooting in Ohio of a teenage girl. What's the reaction been to that?
Well, frustration, I think, and that is something that many people have been saying all along here, right? Where, you know, they feel as though justice may have been served in terms of convicting Derek Chauvin, but there are still so many instances involving law enforcement fatally shooting people, particularly in communities of color across the country. I mentioned the incident involving Daunte Wright. Now you have this situation out in Columbus, and you just don't know kind of where these things go, but this is why lawmakers are calling for police reform. It's why community activists are saying something needs to be done in terms of trying to get better police officers in place so that they can actually better serve the communities that they actually patrol. And really, there's just conversations about use of force, what is appropriate and what officers should be doing when they approach these confrontational conversations and instances, just to try to make sure that everyone is able to go home alive and safe.